My name is Jessica, and I learned that assumptions can be dangerous when my future mother-in-law decided I was a gold digger based on my appearance alone. I met David at a coffee shop near the university where I was finishing my master's in public administration. He was charming, funny, and completely unpretentious despite coming from what I'd later learn was serious money. We talked for 3 hours that first day and I had no idea his family owned half the commercial real estate downtown. David worked as a high school teacher, choosing education over joining the family business. Money isn't everything, he'd say whenever his mother brought up his wasted potential. I admired his independence and his passion for helping kids. What David didn't know initially was that I wasn't the struggling graduate student I appeared to be. Yes, I lived in a tiny apartment and drove an old Honda, but that was by choice. I'd been working for the State Department of Labor since I was 22, starting as a clerk and working my way up through various departments. By 28, I was the regional director of unemployment benefits, overseeing claims processing for 3 counties. I made a solid salary and had built substantial savings, but I preferred living modestly. I'd seen too many people destroy their lives chasing material things. David and I dated for 2 years before he proposed. We kept our relationship quiet and simple, coffee dates, hiking, movie nights at my apartment. He knew I worked for the state but assumed I was just another low-level employee. The engagement party was held at his parents' estate, a sprawling mansion that made me uncomfortable, but David insisted we needed to do it right for his family. I'd met his mother, Margaret, only twice before. Both times she'd been polite but cold, clearly disapproving of her son's choice. She was a woman who measured worth by designer labels and social connections, neither of which I possessed. The party was elegant and expensive, filled with David's childhood friends and his parents' social circle. I wore a simple black dress from Target and felt completely out of place among the Chanel suits and Louboutin heels. Margaret cornered me near the bar while David was talking to his college friends. "We need to discuss something," she said, her voice saccharine but her eyes ice cold. "Of course, Mrs. Harrison. What's on your mind?" "My son's future. His real future, not this teaching fantasy he's been living." I kept my expression neutral. "David loves teaching. He's good at it. David is heir to a multimillion-dollar business empire. He doesn't need to love it, he needs to inherit it responsibly." "I'm not sure what this has to do with me." Her mask slipped completely. "Don't play naive. You're obviously after his money. The way you dress, where you live, that ancient car you drive. You're clearly from nothing hoping to marry into something." Heat rose in my cheeks. "Mrs. Harrison, I think you have the wrong impression." "Do I? Let me be very clear. I will not allow some gold-digging opportunist to destroy my son's future. End this relationship now, or I'll make sure you regret it." Before I could respond, she raised her voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Stay away from my son, gold digger," she screamed, her composure completely gone. "You're just after his money." The party fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to us. David rushed over, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "Mom, what the hell?" "Ask your fiancé what we were discussing," Margaret said coldly, smoothing her hair as if nothing had happened. I stood there, humiliated, as whispers rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked sympathetic, others curious, a few openly judgmental. "Jessica, are you okay?" David asked, putting his arm around me. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The damage was done. In front of his entire social circle, I'd been labeled a gold digger by his own mother. We left immediately. In the car, David was furious. "I'm so sorry. She had no right to do that. She thinks I'm using you. She's wrong. And I told her so." But the seed was planted. Over the next few weeks, I noticed changes. David started insisting on paying for everything, as if proving his mother wrong. He suggested I let him help with my rent, my car payment, my expenses. "I don't need your money," I told him repeatedly. "I know, but I want to help. We're going to be married." The more he pushed, the more I realized Margaret had succeeded in creating doubt. Not in David's mind about me, but in my mind about us. Would I always have to prove I wasn't after his money? Would every gesture of independence be seen as an act? Meanwhile, Margaret continued her campaign. She made comments at family dinners about certain types of women who target successful men. She asked pointed questions about my job, my education, my family's financial situation. What she didn't know was that I'd been quietly investigating Harrison Holdings, her family's business empire. As someone who worked in state government, I had access to employment records, tax filings, and regulatory reports. Harrison Holdings was struggling. They'd over-leveraged during the recession and never fully recovered. Several subsidiaries were hemorrhaging money. The company was surviving on credit and creative accounting. More interesting was Margaret's personal situation. She held a VP position at Harrison Holdings, a job her husband had created for her that paid $200,000 annually for essentially no work. She was also on the boards of 3 nonprofit organizations, collecting hefty fees for minimal duties. Her lifestyle was expensive and entirely dependent on maintaining these positions. The designer clothes, the luxury car lease, the country club memberships, all of it was financed by income she'd done nothing to earn. I kept this information to myself. David didn't need to know his family was in financial trouble, and I certainly wasn't going to use it as ammunition against his mother. But 3 months after the engagement party, everything changed. Harrison Holdings finally collapsed. Years of mismanagement and poor decisions caught up with them. The company filed for bankruptcy, laying off hundreds of employees, including several vice presidents whose positions had been created for family members. Margaret's nonprofit board positions disappeared simultaneously. Apparently, her value to those organizations had been her connection to Harrison Holdings' charitable donations, which were no longer possible. Within a week, she went from unemployed socialite to desperate job seeker. David called me distraught. Mom lost her job. The whole company went under. Dad's scrambling to save what he can, but it looks bad. I'm sorry to hear that. She's never had to look for work before. She doesn't even know where to start. I felt a mixture of sympathy and irony. The woman who'd called me a gold digger was about to discover what it felt like to need money. She'll figure it out, I said gently. Actually, she's going to apply for unemployment benefits while she looks for something new. She has no idea how any of that works. My heart stopped. Unemployment benefits. In our region. Which meant her application would come through my office. Through my desk. For my signature. The gold digger she'd publicly humiliated would be the person deciding whether she qualified for financial assistance. Life, it seemed, had a sense of humor. Margaret's unemployment application landed on my desk on a Tuesday morning, mixed in with dozens of others requiring director-level review. I almost missed it completely until I saw the familiar last name. Harrison Margaret C., former Vice President, Harrison Holdings. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. There it was, her entire employment history, her salary information, her desperate need for financial assistance laid bare in black and white. According to the application, she was requesting the maximum weekly benefit of $450. For someone who'd been making $200,000 a year, it was a dramatic fall. I stared at the paperwork, remembering her voice from the engagement party. You're obviously after his money. You're clearly from nothing. My assistant knocked on my door. Jessica? The Harrison Holdings mass layoff applications are ready for your review. There are 47 of them. Thank you, Lisa. I'll handle them personally. I spent the morning reviewing each application carefully. These were real people who'd lost their jobs through no fault of their own. Warehouse workers, office staff, security guards, hardworking people who deserved their benefits without delay. Margaret's application, however, required additional scrutiny. Her employment history showed years of salary increases with no corresponding job performance reviews. Her position description was vague at best. But technically she qualified for unemployment benefits. The question was whether I could remain professional when faced with the woman who'd humiliated me publicly. I approved her application. Not because I felt sorry for her, but because it was the right thing to do. My personal feelings couldn't interfere with people's legitimate claims. I signed the approval letter personally, knowing she'd see my name and title when she received it. The letter went out Thursday. Friday afternoon my phone rang. Department of Labor, Director Martinez speaking. Silence. Then a small, shaky voice. Is this Jessica Martinez? Yes, ma'am. How can I help you? This is Margaret Harrison. I received a letter today. About my unemployment claim. Yes, Mrs. Harrison. Your benefits have been approved. You should receive your first payment within 7 business days. Another long silence. You're the Jessica who's engaged to my son. I am. And you're the regional director of unemployment benefits. I am. I could hear her breathing, processing this information. This whole time you've been in charge of unemployment benefits for this region? Yes. For the past 3 years. But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old car. I prefer to live within my means. The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. Mrs. Harrison? Are you still there? I need to see you, she said finally. In person. Please. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. Margaret arrived looking nothing like the polished socialite from the engagement party. Her designer clothes were replaced by department store basics. Her perfectly styled hair looked like she'd done it herself. She sat across from me, her hands shaking slightly as she ordered just black coffee. I owe you an apology, she began. You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Harrison. Please. Let me say this. She took a shaky breath. I called you a gold digger in front of 50 people. I accused you of using my son for money. And all this time you've been doing my job. Making more money than David does teaching. Making more money than I ever made legitimately. Her voice cracked on the last word. I stirred my coffee, choosing my words carefully. Mrs. Harrison, I never told David about my position because it wasn't important to our relationship. I didn't tell you because, frankly, you never asked about my work. You just assumed. I assumed because of how you looked. How you dressed. Where you lived. You assumed because you measure people's worth by their possessions. She nodded miserably. You could have denied my unemployment claim. You had every reason to. No, I didn't. You lost your job. You paid into the system. You qualify for benefits. My personal feelings don't matter. Margaret looked up at me with something I'd never seen before, respect. You're nothing like I thought you were. No, I'm not. David doesn't know, does he? About your real job. I shook my head. I was planning to tell him after we got married. I wanted him to love me for who I am, not what I do or how much I make. And I almost ruined that for you. You tried to. She was quiet for a long moment. What happens now? Now you look for work. Your benefits will help while you search. And hopefully you've learned something about making assumptions. What about David? Will you tell him what happened today? I considered this. That depends on you, Mrs. Harrison. What do you mean? I mean, are you going to keep treating me like an enemy? Or are we going to try to be family? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Probably not. But I'm offering it anyway. That evening I sat David down and told him everything. About my real job, my salary, my savings. About his mother's unemployment claim crossing my desk. You've been the regional director this whole time? His eyes were wide with shock. I wanted you to know me first. Not my title or my paycheck. And my mom. She applied for unemployment benefits from your office? She did. And I approved her claim. David was quiet for a long time. After what she did to you at the engagement party? It was the right thing to do. He pulled me close. I can't believe you've been keeping this secret. All those times she questioned your motives. She didn't know. To be fair, I didn't give her much to go on. That's not an excuse for how she treated you. The next week, Margaret called David and asked if we could all have dinner together. She'd found a part-time job at a non-profit organization. Entry-level but honest work. At dinner, she looked directly at me. I was wrong about you, Jessica. Completely, utterly wrong. I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old woman who thought she knew everything. We all make mistakes, Mrs. Harrison. Margaret. Please call me Margaret. 6 months later, at our wedding, Margaret stood up during the reception and asked for the microphone. I want to tell you all about my daughter-in-law, she began, her voice strong and clear. When I first met Jessica, I made assumptions based on appearances. I thought I knew who she was because of what she wore and where she lived. The room was silent, everyone listening intently. I was wrong. Jessica Martinez is one of the most accomplished, generous, and professional women I've ever met. She's been serving our community for years, helping people in their time of need. When I needed help, she was there for me too, despite having every reason not to be. She looked at me across the room. Welcome to the family, Jessica. We're lucky to have you. As the applause filled the room, I realized that sometimes the best relationships come from the most unexpected beginnings. Margaret and I would never be best friends, But we'd found something better: mutual respect. And David finally understood that the woman he'd fallen in love with was even more remarkable than he'd imagined. The gold digger his mother had feared turned out to be the strong, independent woman who'd help hold their family together when everything fell apart.